A young orphan girl was thrown out of the rain, her clothes soaked, her spirit nearly broken. No one noticed until a kind billionaire prince stepped forward, offering help when the world had turned its back. That single act would change her life forever, sparking a journey from despair to hope, a journey you won't forget. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Amara was born into silence, not celebration. No songs announced her arrival. No proud father waited outside a hospital room, pacing with anxious joy. No mother held her close, whispering promises of love and protection. Her first moments in the world passed without witnesses who would later say, "I was there when she was born." She never knew her parents. Their faces never appeared in her dreams. Their voices never echoed in her memories. For Amara, the idea of home was not a place filled with warmth, but a shifting concept. Rooms that changed, beds that were never truly hers, and names of caregivers that blurred together over time. From her earliest days, she belonged to orphanages, shared spaces, and borrowed kindness that always came with limits. She learned early that love was temporary and attention was conditional. In the orphanage, life followed strict routines. Wake up, line up, quietly, clean, study, sleep. The rules were not cruel, but they were unyielding. Children who cried too often were labeled difficult. Those who asked too many questions were told to be grateful. Amara learned quickly where she fit, somewhere between invisible and obedient. The world taught her its first lesson before she could properly speak. Survival required silence. She watched other children leave, adopted, chosen, embraced by strangers who smiled with excitement. Each goodbye carved a quiet ache into her chest. She never cried when it happened. She learned that tears did not change outcomes. They only made adults uncomfortable. So she smiled when required and clapped when others were chosen, even as her heart wondered why no one ever pointed at her and said, "That one. We want her." As years passed, Amara learned to work harder than everyone else. She swept floors until they shone. She folded clothes with perfect corners. She helped younger children without being asked. Not because she was rewarded, but because usefulness felt safer than need. Need made people impatient. She learned not to expect too much. Expectations led to disappointment, and disappointment was a wound that took too long to heal. Hope for Amara became something dangerous, something she handled carefully like fragile glass. Each time she allowed herself to believe in a better tomorrow, the fall back to reality felt sharper. So she trained her heart to hope quietly, in secret, where no one could see it break. At night, lying on her narrow bed, she stared at the ceiling and imagined what it might feel like to belong to someone. Not to a place, not to a system, but to a person. Someone who would notice when she was missing, who would care if she was sad, who would say her name with affection instead of instruction. But morning always came, and with it, the reminder that life moved forward whether you were ready or not. Yet even in her quiet suffering, Amara carried something rare. Despite neglect and absence, her heart refused to harden. She shared her food when others went hungry. She comforted crying children when no one else noticed. She offered smiles that were genuine, even when her own spirit felt tired. Pain had shaped her, but it had not made her cruel. Somewhere deep inside, beyond the silence and the survival, Amara held on to a truth she could not explain. That her life had meaning, even if the world had not yet recognized it. And though she did not know it then, the silence she was born into was not her destiny. It was only the beginning. At 17, Amara's life took a turn that felt, at first, like mercy. After years of moving between orphanages and temporary arrangements, distant relatives stepped forward and offered her shelter. Their voices were calm, their promises reassuring. "You are family," they said. "You will have a place here." For Amara, those words felt like answered prayers. The house was larger than any place she had lived before. It had separate rooms, a proper kitchen, and a quiet dignity that made her believe she had finally arrived somewhere permanent. That first night, as she lay on a real bed with clean sheets, she allowed herself a dangerous thought. Maybe this is where my life truly begins. But kindness, she soon learned, can wear a convincing mask. Within days, expectations began to form, unspoken but heavy. She woke earlier than everyone else and slept later than the rest. She cleaned rooms she was never invited to sit in. She cooked meals she was rarely thanked for. Each task was presented as responsibility, but beneath it lay a message she understood too well. You must earn your right to stay. She did not complain. She never had. She told herself this was normal, that family required sacrifice. If she worked harder, stayed quieter, smiled more, perhaps she would truly belong. But she was not treated like family. She was treated like a burden that tolerated itself only through usefulness. Every small mistake was magnified. Plate not washed well enough. A shirt ironed with a slight crease. A meal that lacked flavor. The words came sharp and careless, often spoken loudly, as if to remind her of her place. You should be grateful, they said. Do you know how lucky you are? Grateful for what? For shelter that came with humiliation. For food served alongside reminders that she was not truly wanted. Amara learned to shrink herself even more. Her dreams, once fragile but alive, were quietly dismissed. When she spoke about schooling or ambitions, laughter followed. Focus on being useful, her guardian would say. Dreams won't feed you. At night, she cried silently into her pillow, careful not to let anyone hear. She replayed conversations in her head, wondering how she could do better, how she could become less of a problem. The familiar feeling returned, the one she had known all her life, that her existence required justification. Still she stayed. Still she hoped. Then came the night everything broke. It was something small, almost insignificant. A misunderstanding over money. A question asked at the wrong moment. Tone misread. The room grew quiet, and Amara sensed danger before it arrived. Her guardian's face hardened. Patience, thin and exhausted, finally snapped. You are not our responsibility, they said, cold and final. We took you in out of kindness, not obligation. The words landed heavier than a slap. They erased every effort, every sacrifice, every silent endurance. Amara stood frozen, unable to speak. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to promise to do better. But she saw it clearly then. The decision had already been made. By sunrise, her few belongings were packed into a small bag. No discussion, no goodbye, no regret. She stepped outside as the door closed behind her, the sound echoing louder than the morning birds. The house that had once felt like hope now stood still and indifferent, as if she had never existed within its walls. She was thrown out, unwanted, unseen, alone. Standing there with nothing but a bag and a breaking heart, Amara realized something painful and true. Some houses provide shelter but never love. And as she walked away, unsure of where the road would take her next, she carried with her not just rejection, but the quiet determination that this would not be the end of her story. The city was loud, but it did not hear her pain. Cars rushed past with impatient horns. Streetlights flickered on as night settled in, casting long shadows across concrete sidewalks. People moved quickly, laughing, arguing, talking into phones, each wrapped in their own lives. To them, the city was alive and busy. To Amara, it was vast, cold, and indifferent. She became a quiet observer of other people's comfort. With nowhere to go, Amara learned how to disappear in plain sight. She slept in corners, behind closed shops, near bus stops, beside buildings that offered little shelter from wind or rain. Some nights she stayed awake, afraid that sleep would make her vulnerable. Other nights, exhaustion dragged her into shallow rest. Her body curled tightly as if she could make herself smaller and safer. Food became a memory rather than a certainty. She skipped meals not by choice, but by circumstance. The ache in her stomach was constant, a dull reminder of everything she had lost. When she did eat, it was whatever kindness or chance provided. A piece of bread, leftover food, a cup of warm water that felt like luxury. Hunger humbled her in ways she had never known. It stripped pride from her thoughts and replaced it with gratitude for even the smallest mercy. Cold nights taught her endurance. The chill seeped into her bones, especially when rain fell and soaked her clothes. She shivered silently, wrapping her arms around herself, imagining warmth she no longer had. She counted minutes until dawn, believing morning meant safety, even though it rarely brought relief. What hurt most wasn't the poverty. It was the invisibility. People passed her every day without looking twice. Some avoided her eyes. Others glanced briefly, then turned away, uncomfortable with what she represented. A few muttered words under their breath, reminders that society had already decided what she was worth. In those moments, shame crept in quietly. Not because she had done something wrong, but because being unwanted had taught her to question her own value. She wondered if the world was right to ignore her. If maybe she truly was easy to discard. She thought of the orphanage. The house that rejected her. The words that followed her everywhere. Be grateful. Be quiet. Be useful. At night, when the city finally slowed, Amara allowed herself to feel everything she had buried during the day. Tears fell freely then, soaking into her sleeves as she pressed her face against her knees. She cried for the girl she used to be, for the future she had imagined, for the warmth she had never known. But something within her refused to break completely. Even in hunger, even in cold, Amara refused bitterness. She saw cruelty, but she did not become cruel. She experienced neglect, but she did not lose compassion. When she encountered others who struggled like her, she shared what little she had. A kind word, a smile, a moment of understanding. In the deepest hours of the night, when doubt pressed heavily on her chest, she whispered words only she could hear. This will not be the end of me. She repeated it until the words felt real. Until they carried her through another night. Until hope, fragile and quiet, found room to breathe again. Amara did not know how or when her life would change. She only knew one thing with certainty. The city might ignore her, the world might overlook her, but she would not give up on herself. And in that quiet decision, made under cold skies and empty streets, the foundation of her future was being laid. Rain fell in relentless sheets that afternoon, drumming against the pavement and turning Lagos streets into rivers of silver light. Amara's thin clothes clung to her body, soaked through and heavy, weighing down her every step. She had been wandering for hours, searching for any dry corner to rest, any place that might offer warmth or a scrap of food. Exhaustion tugged at her limbs like chains, and the world blurred through the rain. Her legs gave way near the entrance of a luxury hotel, and she collapsed onto the slick sidewalk. Her bag spilled beside her, its meager contents, one worn book, a few pieces of clothing, and a half-eaten sandwich, scattered across the ground. The noise of the city continued around her. Honking cars, hurried footsteps, laughter, and conversations that felt distant and unreachable. Yet no one stopped. No hand reached out. For a moment, Amara thought she was invisible, as if the city had finally swallowed her whole. Her chest heaved painfully, heart racing from hunger and fear. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I cannot end here. I will survive." Then, through the gray blur of rain and rushing pedestrians, he appeared. He moved calmly, deliberately, not like the others who darted past without noticing. He carried himself with a quiet authority, a presence that demanded attention without demanding it. His clothes were impeccable, a tailored coat, polished shoes, and a neat tie. Yet there was no arrogance in his posture, no superiority in his gaze. Just awareness. He knelt beside her, his voice gentle but firm. "Are you all right?" he asked. The words were simple, but to Amara, they sounded like a lifeline thrown across a stormy sea. She looked up, exhausted and weary, and met his eyes. Eyes that held neither pity nor judgment, only concern. He did not ask why she was there. He did not comment on her tattered clothes or her soaked hair. He did not offer platitudes. He helped. That was all. Carefully, he lifted her to a nearby sheltered corner, handed her a warm blanket he produced from his coat, and fetched water from a street vendor. His movements were deliberate, respectful, and completely unassuming. Amara, too weak to speak, could only stare, the faintest spark of hope kindling in her chest. "I'm Alexander," he said, introducing himself without ceremony. "Prince Alexander. You shouldn't be out here in this rain. You need help." Amara swallowed, a lump forming in her throat. She had been surviving for so long without someone noticing her that the very act of being seen felt miraculous. She nodded, unable to find words. He didn't just see her suffering. He saw her. And in that simple recognition, a shift began. The despair that had weighed on her shoulders for years loosened just enough to allow the faintest glimmer of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, her life could change. Alexander didn't promise her the world. He didn't hand her riches or immediate rescue. But his presence, his willingness to notice, to act, to care without judgment, was enough to awaken something in her. A quiet, fragile hope that whispered, "Life may not have ended for me. Not yet." That rainy afternoon, as the city's chaos carried on around them and the puddles reflected the gray sky, two lives crossed in a way neither could have anticipated. One carried despair and exhaustion. The other, the power and influence of a world Amara had never touched. And in that brief encounter, the first threads of her new story began to weave themselves together. It was a small moment, almost imperceptible in the vastness of the city. Yet it was the moment that would change everything. Alexander acted with quiet efficiency. He did not make a show of generosity, nor did he ask Amara to explain herself. First, he took her to a small clinic where she received medical attention. Her exhaustion and malnourishment finally addressed by professionals who treated her with respect. The nurse's hands were gentle, and for the first time in years, Amara felt that someone truly cared. Not for what she could do or who she was supposed to be, but for the simple fact that she existed. Next, Alexander arranged temporary shelter. It wasn't a palace, nor an ostentatious display of wealth. It was a modest apartment, quiet and safe, with clean sheets, a warm bed, and a small kitchen. It had walls that would protect her from the rain, from the cold, and from the dangers of the streets. For Amara, it felt like stepping into a dream, a place where she could finally rest without glancing nervously at every shadow. Food came next. Simple, nourishing meals that she could not remember tasting in years. The taste of warm rice, the aroma of stewed vegetables, and the comforting heat of soup filled more than her stomach. They filled her with a sense of normalcy she had never known, a small reminder that life could be kind. But Alexander didn't stop at her body. He saw something deeper, something that had survived all the neglect, hunger, and cruelty she had endured. "You deserve more than survival," he said gently, his voice calm but unwavering. "You deserve to live, to grow, to dream. No one should ever have treated you like you were less than that." Amara's eyes welled with tears. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of years of rejection pressed down on her chest. Dreaming had always led to disappointment. She swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. He smiled, not patronizingly but with understanding. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I just want you to know that for the first time in a long while, someone sees you. Truly sees you." And in that simple acknowledgement, Amara felt something she hadn't felt in years, the faint stirrings of hope. For the first time she slept without fear. She rested not as someone hiding from the world, but as someone who had been seen and cared for. The small apartment became more than shelter. It became a space where possibility could take root. Days passed, and Alexander continued to provide guidance and support. He encouraged her to eat well, to rest, and to care for herself. Slowly, the walls Amara had built around her heart began to shift, not broken by force, but softened by genuine kindness. She began to realize that survival alone was not enough. She could aspire to more. She could dream again. Amara did not know it yet, but this encounter, this unexpected door, was the beginning of a transformation that would ripple far beyond her own life. The world that had ignored her, dismissed her, and rejected her was about to witness a rise they had never anticipated. The girl who had been invisible in orphanages, ignored in the streets, and cast out of homes was about to step into a new story. A story that would be marked not by despair, but by courage, strength, and resilience. And somewhere deep in her heart, Amara whispered softly, almost to herself, "This is only the beginning." But what happens next? How will Amara navigate a world so different from the one she has known? What challenges and secrets await her in a life filled with wealth, influence, and unexpected opportunities? The next chapter of her journey is about to reveal truths that will shock the world and test her in ways she has never imagined. You won't want to miss part 2. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications so you can follow Amara's incredible rise from hardship to hope. Her story is far from over, and the surprises coming next will leave you on the edge of your seat.